Serenity Valley Stories invites you into the shadows. Like and subscribe for more tales that will haunt your nights. And now our feature presentation, The Night the Woods Howled. It started like any other summer camp night, the smell of wood smoke, the distant laughter of kids playing in the fields, and the sun slowly sinking behind the trees, casting a warm orange glow over the cabins. I was one of the older campers, a 14-year-old who'd been coming to Camp Pines for the last 4 summers. By now, I knew every path, every clearing, every dark corner where you could sneak off to talk without the counselors breathing down your neck. But something felt different that evening, something I couldn't shake. The air was heavy, thicker than usual, like a storm was brewing even though the sky was clear. I brushed it off as just a weird vibe. Maybe I was tired from the long hike we'd done earlier that day. There were about a dozen of us spread across 4 cabins, boys and girls separated like always. The counselors, usually strict about keeping us in our own cabins after dark, seemed distracted as the day wore on. They barely rounded us up for the evening campfire, letting the usual curfew slide. None of us really cared, though. We figured it was just another chill night at camp. When darkness finally fell, something changed. It was subtle at first. The distant hoots of owls quieted, and the usual rustle of the trees seemed to stop. The campfire crackled louder than normal, and I swear the woods seemed darker, like the trees were closing in. I was sitting with my best friend, Max, when I noticed the staff had wandered off. It wasn't like them to leave us unsupervised, especially at night. But when I scanned the area, there wasn't a single counselor in sight. Where'd they all go? I asked Max, nudging him with my elbow. He was staring at the woods, his face lit by the dying fire. Who knows? Maybe they're in the cabin. Max shrugged, but I could tell he was uneasy too. I don't like this, I whispered, my voice lower than intended. It felt wrong, like the forest was listening. As the minutes passed, the campfire dimmed to embers, and without anyone to stoke it, the light began to die. The other kids, oblivious to the creeping tension, started getting up, talking about heading back to the cabins. That's when we heard the howl. It echoed through the trees, low and deep, vibrating through my chest. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up as my brain tried to process the sound. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard, animalistic, yet wrong. Too human. What the hell was that? One of the younger kids, Jake, asked, his voice shaky. Max and I exchanged a look. Probably a wolf, I said, though my gut twisted, telling me it was anything but. We should go back to the cabins, Max said, his voice steady but his eyes darting around. The group seemed to silently agree, gathering their things in a hurry, all of us pretending like we weren't scared, even though we were. We were halfway to the cabins when it happened again, the howl, closer this time, sending a fresh wave of terror through us. I could see the fear spreading like wildfire among the younger kids, their eyes wide, breath quickening. We broke into a run, the cabins in sight now, but as we approached, something even stranger hit us, the staff was gone. Not just absent from the campfire, but from the entire campground. Their cars were still parked at the edge of the woods, but not a single adult was anywhere to be found. They wouldn't just leave us, would they? Max asked, voice cracking. They can't just disappear, I replied, feeling the same mix of disbelief and rising dread. My mind raced through every possible explanation, but none of them made sense. That's when we heard the first scream. It cut through the night like a knife, high-pitched and full of terror. We all froze. It came from behind us, somewhere near the woods, and before any of us could move, another scream echoed. This one was even closer. My heart pounded as I turned, my breath catching in my throat. There was movement in the trees, something big and fast. It was too dark to see clearly, but it was moving toward us, too quickly, too deliberately. Get inside! I shouted, snapping everyone out of their shock. We bolted toward the nearest cabin, shoving each other through the door, our hands fumbling to lock it behind us. Max, Jake, and a handful of others crowded around me, eyes wide with fear. "What the hell was that?" someone whispered, their voice trembling. "I don't know," I muttered, looking out the cabin's small window. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear it, branches breaking, footsteps circling the cabin, and that low growl, deep and guttural. "We can't stay here," Max said. "If that thing tries to break in." "We don't even know what it is," I interrupted, though I could see the panic rising in the room. The cabin suddenly felt too small, the walls too thin. Then there was a loud thud against the door, followed by a growl so close I could feel it in my bones. Whatever was outside, it was huge. And it was hunting us. "It's a werewolf," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible. "My grandpa told me stories." I wanted to laugh it off, to tell him he was being ridiculous, but the evidence was right outside. The howls, the growls, the sudden disappearance of the staff, it all pointed to one thing. "We need to move," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could. "We'll head to the other cabins, stick together, and stay out of its way." Max nodded, and I could see the other kids were looking to us for direction. The older ones were scared but trying to hold it together, while the younger ones looked ready to bolt at any second. We waited, listening to the sound of footsteps receding, and then I cracked the door open just enough to peek outside. The clearing was empty, no movement, no sound. It was now or never. "Go!" I hissed, and we all sprinted toward the next cabin, hearts pounding in our chests. The air was thick with tension as we made our way across the campground, moving from one cabin to the next, always keeping low, always listening for the creature. The howls grew distant for a while, and we thought maybe, just maybe, we'd escaped. Then we heard another scream. This one was cut short, followed by a sickening crunch that echoed through the trees. My stomach turned, and I knew, deep down, that someone hadn't made it. We kept running, breathless and terrified, until we reached the last cabin. Once inside, I collapsed against the wall, trying to catch my breath. Max locked the door behind us, and the others huddled in the center of the room, shaking with fear. "We can't keep running like this," I said, wiping sweat from my brow. "We need a plan. We need to survive," Max replied, his eyes darting around the cabin as though searching for something, anything, that could help us. Then the scratching started. It was faint at first, barely audible over our panicked breaths, but it grew louder. The sound of claws raking against the wooden walls. We all froze, staring at the door as the growling outside intensified. "Is it trying to get in?" Jake whispered. "We're not gonna wait around to find out," Max said, his face pale. But before we could move, the door rattled violently, and we all screamed. The werewolf was at the door, its growls growing more frenzied as it pushed against the wood, making it groan and creak. "Upstairs!" I shouted, pointing to the narrow staircase that led to the attic. We scrambled up, practically falling over each other in our haste to escape. The attic was small and cramped, but it had a single window facing the woods. I pressed my face to it, watching as the creature circled the cabin, sniffing the air, its hulking form illuminated by the faint moonlight. It was even bigger than I'd thought, its fur matted with blood, its eyes glowing yellow in the darkness. It paused, lifting its snout toward us, and for a moment, I thought it could see me. Then it charged. The cabin shook as it slammed into the walls below, the wood groaning under the force. We huddled in the attic, hands over our mouths, trying not to make a sound as the werewolf attacked the cabin with savage intensity. It didn't take long for the door to break open. The sound of wood splintering filled the cabin, followed by the heavy thud of footsteps. My heart was in my throat as I listened to the werewolf searching below, sniffing, growling, hunting. I motioned for the others to stay still, to stay quiet, even though the fear was nearly paralyzing. Suddenly, the attic trapdoor creaked. The werewolf was in the house. I held my breath, praying it wouldn't find us, praying it would leave. But the scratching at the base of the trapdoor told me otherwise. It knew we were here. And then, without warning, the howls stopped. Everything fell silent, except for the pounding of our hearts. For what felt like hours, we waited, listening, barely daring to breathe. But the werewolf never came up. Slowly, carefully, I peeked out the window again. The clearing was empty. The beast was gone. We survived. For now. The quiet hung heavy in the air, the only sound the uneven breaths of the kids huddled around me. For a few long minutes, no one dared move, not even a whisper. The werewolf had vanished into the night, but we all knew better than to believe we were safe. Max broke the silence. Do you think it's really gone? I didn't have an answer. The creature had stopped its attack, but there was no telling if it was lurking just beyond the cabin or waiting for us to come out. But one thing was certain, we couldn't stay hidden in the attic forever. I don't know, I admitted, trying to keep my voice steady. But we can't stay up here. We need to find the others. If there are any left. The words hung in the air, and I could see the fear in their eyes. I didn't want to think about who we'd lost, the screams we'd heard. But we had to keep going. We had to survive. Max nodded, his expression grim but determined. We can make a run for the woods, find the trail back to the parking lot. We should wait until daylight, I countered. It's too dangerous at night. That thing. It hunts in the dark. A tense silence followed. We all knew staying meant facing the creature again, but running blindly through the woods at night felt like certain death. Suddenly, a noise outside made us all freeze, a low growl, followed by the distinct sound of footsteps circling the cabin again. The werewolf was still out there, stalking us. I held my breath, motioning for everyone to stay still. We huddled together, listening as the beast sniffed at the ground, its claws scraping the earth. It moved slowly, deliberately, as though it was savoring the hunt. After what felt like an eternity, the sounds faded again, leaving us in a fragile silence. We can't wait until morning, Max whispered, eyes wide with panic. It's toying with us. We need to go now. I knew he was right. The werewolf wasn't going to leave us alone. Staying in the attic was a death sentence. We had to make a break for it. Okay, I whispered back, my heart pounding in my chest. We'll head for the parking lot. Stick together, and no matter what happens, keep moving. Everyone nodded, fear etched into their faces, but there was no time to waste. We carefully made our way down from the attic, the floor creaking under our weight. The cabin was eerily quiet, the shattered door hanging on its hinges. Outside, the air was cold, and the night was unnervingly still. I could feel the tension in the group as we crept away from the cabin, every rustle of the trees or snap of a twig making us jump. We were halfway to the woods when the howling started again, louder and closer than before. Run! I yelled, grabbing Jake's arm and pulling him forward as the group broke into a sprint. The sound of the werewolf crashing through the trees filled the air, its growls growing louder and more frantic. Branches whipped at my face as we tore through the forest, stumbling over roots and rocks. My lungs burned, but I didn't dare slow down. I could hear the creature behind us, its heavy footsteps closing the distance. We burst into a small clearing, the moonlight casting eerie shadows across the ground. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of someone falling. I turned just in time to see one of the younger kids, Emily, hit the ground hard, her ankle twisted at an odd angle. No, she cried out, her eyes wide with terror as she struggled to get back up. I skidded to a stop, panic surging through me as I ran back to help her. Max grabbed my arm, pulling me back. You can't, he started, but I yanked free, rushing to Emily's side. The growls were so close now, the beast practically on top of us. With all the strength I had, I lifted Emily up, practically dragging her as we continued toward the parking lot. My legs were screaming in protest, but I couldn't stop. Not now. The others were ahead of us, and for a moment, I thought we might make it. But then I heard a blood-curdling scream. I didn't need to turn around to know what had happened. The werewolf had caught someone. Emily was sobbing, her breath ragged as I pulled her along. We were so close. I could see the glint of the parking lot lights through the trees. We stumbled into the lot just as the growls faded again, the beast retreating back into the shadows of the forest. I collapsed to the ground, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. Emily clung to me, her face buried in my shoulder. We had made it. But not all of us. Max stood a few feet away, staring at the dark tree line with wide eyes. The others were silent, too shocked to speak. We had survived the night, but the screams of the kids we'd lost echoed in my mind, a haunting reminder of the nightmare we'd just escaped. The werewolf was gone for now, but its presence lingered in the air, a constant threat that would never truly leave us. We had no idea where it had come from or why it had hunted us. And maybe that was the scariest part of all. Because somewhere out there, in the darkness of the woods, the beast was still waiting, and I knew it would come back. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. And I wasn't sure we'd survive it again. Thank you for watching Serenity Valley Stories. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another scary tale. Share your thoughts in the comments below.